Times are getting brutal, and society is spiraling into chaos. And what do our so-called leaders do about it? They double down on their power-grabbing schemes, throwing down more oppressive laws to keep us under their thumb. These spineless politicians are in full-blown panic mode, desperate to hold on to their crumbling empires. They don't care about fixing the mess. They're too busy cranking out half-baked draconian rules under the pretense of protecting us. Protecting us from what? Capital flight? Tax evasion? Whatever convenient boogeyman they've cooked up this week to justify stripping away our freedoms. Let's not sugarcoat it. History is littered with power-hungry governments cracking down on their citizens to stay in control. Weapons bans, gold confiscations, prohibition, you name it. And it's happening again. This time, the targets are new, but the playbook hasn't changed. In this video, I'm calling it like it is. I'm exposing the next round of bans and restrictions coming for us, and trust me, the list isn't pretty. Our government is a disaster zone. They're fumbling every critical issue, economy, security, you name it, while shoving ideological nonsense down our throats. They're blatantly ignoring the need for real, pragmatic solutions to today's crises. Some of their moves are so egregiously overreaching, they're towing the line of being outright unconstitutional. Don't believe me? Look at the mess they just made with the federal budget. The highest court had to step in and smack them down for trying to fund pet projects with illegal money grabs. The writing's on the wall. People are fed up. Their coalition is crumbling at the state level, and it's only a matter of time before it collapses federally too. So what's their plan? Push through as many laws as they can, as fast as they can, before their time's up. Laws that shamelessly chip away at our freedoms. Over the past few years, they've ramped up their game, drowning us in a flood of new restrictions that make it harder and harder to live freely. Bit by bit, they're slicing away our rights with their sneaky salami tactics. They're not going to stop until we wake up with nothing left. In this video, I'm going to pull back the curtain and show you exactly what's at stake. These are the next big targets for bans and heavy restrictions, and you need to know what's coming. Get ready, because it's going to be a fight. 5. Distilling and home brewing equipment. Governments have a long history of cracking down on home alcohol production, often under the guise of public health or taxation. During Prohibition in the United States, 1920 to 1933, millions of law-abiding citizens became criminals overnight simply for making or consuming alcohol. Today, that historical precedent remains alive in subtler forms. In Germany, for example, the use of personal distillation equipment is heavily restricted, with bans on even small-scale schnapps production. You're allowed to own distillation kits up to 2 liters, but using them for alcohol? That's outright illegal. Think this doesn't apply to you? Think again. Economic instability often drives governments to tighten control over anything that impacts their tax revenue. Homemade beer, wine, or spirits dodge the hefty excise taxes slapped onto commercially sold alcohol, and that means less money for the government's coffers. For example, in 2018, Germany banned small-scale distilling primarily to ensure alcohol taxes stayed intact. Add inflation or economic downturns to the mix, and you've got the perfect storm for new restrictions. Why is this important now? Because distillation and brewing equipment are still widely available. But for how long? As economic conditions worsen globally, it wouldn't be surprising to see restrictions pop up in more countries. With unemployment rising and people looking for cheaper, homemade alternatives to expensive, taxed goods, governments will inevitably crack down. Even the kits you can currently buy could disappear, with heavy fines or worse for those caught owning or using them. And don't forget, laws might also shift toward regulating raw materials like grains and yeast to further clamp down. If you've been considering buying a kit, the time is now. Store it quietly, learn to use it, and safeguard your ability to produce essential goods like high-proof alcohol, not just for personal use, but as a potential barter item in tough times. 4. Gold and precious metals. Precious metals like gold and silver have been a financial safety net for centuries, especially during economic crises. Governments know this all too well and have repeatedly acted to control access to these tangible forms of wealth. From 1933 to 1975, the United States outright banned private gold ownership. Citizens were forced to sell their gold to the government at a fixed price, only to watch the official price of gold skyrocket shortly after. This allowed the government to profit while stripping citizens of their economic security. Why would this happen again? Look at current inflation rates. As the cost of living rises and paper currencies lose value, more people are turning to gold and silver as reliable stores of wealth. Governments, fearing capital flight or the erosion of trust in their fiat currencies, may once again tighten control. For example, anonymous purchases of gold in the EU are now limited to as low as €2,000, with further reductions rumored. They justify these restrictions as measures to combat money laundering. But the real goal is clear: preventing citizens from escaping the financial system. Preppers, this is your warning. Acquiring gold and silver is still legal, but the window may be closing. And don't just think about owning it. Think about how to secure it. Safety deposit boxes might not be the safest option if banks start reporting holdings to the government. Instead, consider private safes or even burying your metals in secure, marked locations. Precious metals not only retain value, but also act as a barter currency when traditional money systems fail. Whether it's for trading essentials in a collapsed economy or preserving your wealth during hyperinflation, owning physical gold and silver is one of the smartest preps you can make before it's too late. 3. Crossbows. Crossbows may seem like an unconventional prepper item, but in a world where firearm regulations are tightening by the day, these ancient weapons are becoming an essential tool for self-defense and hunting. Here in the United States, crossbows are still largely unregulated compared to firearms. In most states, you can walk into a sporting goods store and buy one without a background check, permit, or even so much as a second glance. But how long will that freedom last? Here's why this matters now. Political and social unrest is rising, and governments often respond by clamping down on any tool that could be used for self-defense. We've already seen how restrictive firearm laws have become. States like California and New York impose regulations on magazine capacities, ammunition sales, and firearm purchases. Even bows and arrows are subject to scrutiny in some jurisdictions, with laws on concealed carrying of archery equipment or limitations on use during hunting seasons. Crossbows could easily be next in line. Politicians will justify it under the guise of public safety, as they've done with so many other tools. But make no mistake, this is about control. And it's not just about owning a crossbow. If the government decides to regulate them, expect restrictions on accessories like bolts, arrows, scopes, and even maintenance supplies like stringing kits. Without these, your crossbow is just a heavy paperweight. Plus, there's the possibility of requiring licenses or permits to own or use one. Remember, the slippery slope is real. In the UK, where firearms are heavily restricted, crossbows are now under scrutiny after incidents involving their misuse. The US could easily follow suit. The solution? If you don't already own a crossbow, now's the time. Invest in a high-quality model and stock up on bolts and spare parts while they're still affordable and unregulated. Learn how to use and maintain it effectively. A crossbow is not only a powerful self-defense weapon, but also a valuable hunting tool when food supplies are scarce. In a worst-case scenario, it could even serve as a barter item. But don't wait too long. The regulatory noose is tightening, and you don't want to be caught unprepared. 2. Protective weapons. In the U.S., the freedom to own protective gear like body armor, ballistic vests, gas masks, and helmets has long been taken for granted. Unlike many countries where such items are already restricted, most states still allow private citizens to buy and own them. But this freedom is increasingly under threat, and the signs are everywhere. Here's the reality. Several states, including Connecticut, have already made moves to regulate body armor. In Connecticut, you can't buy body armor online. You're required to make purchases in person, a restriction aimed at limiting access. New York has introduced legislation that seeks to outright ban civilian possession of military-style body armor, like ceramic or steel plates, claiming it's about preventing criminals from becoming unstoppable. While this rhetoric may sound reasonable on the surface, it's part of a broader trend, restricting the average citizen's ability to protect themselves. And it's not just body armor. In recent years, federal law has taken aim at items like gas masks, claiming they might be used during riots or protests. During the George Floyd protests in 2020, shipments of gas masks and protective gear were intercepted under suspicion of being used in civil unrest. This should alarm preppers. If protective gear can be associated with protest activity, it's only a matter of time before laws expand to make owning or buying such items a bureaucratic nightmare or outright illegal. The argument often used to justify these laws is that bad actors could misuse protective gear. But let's face it, criminals don't obey laws. These restrictions only disarm law-abiding citizens, leaving them vulnerable in situations where they might need to defend themselves or their families. This is particularly concerning in the face of growing civil unrest, natural disasters, or even widespread government crackdowns in emergencies. What can you do? Start by purchasing protective gear now, before more restrictions roll out. Focus on acquiring items like NIJ-certified ballistic plates, vests, and helmets. Gas masks with proper filters, for example NBC-rated, are essential, especially as civil unrest increases and chemical or tear gas dispersal becomes more common. If you live in a state with restrictive laws, consider traveling to a neighboring state where the regulations are less stringent, but act quickly. The U.S. government has a history of implementing sweeping changes to gear accessibility almost overnight. Think post-9/11 restrictions on tactical equipment. Owning protective gear today could mean the difference between safety and vulnerability tomorrow. Don't wait for the laws to tighten. Prepare while you still can. 1. Seeds and home growing. Seeds, the very foundation of self-reliance and food security, are quietly becoming a battleground in the United States. While most people assume that growing your own food is a simple, unregulated right, the reality is far more complex. Laws and corporate practices are already closing in on your ability to independently grow and sustain your own food supply. Here's the situation. While there's currently no outright ban on seed ownership or small-scale gardening in the U.S., there are subtle and alarming trends pointing toward future restrictions. The Plant Variety Protection Act, PVPA, and the broader implications of intellectual property laws on seeds have already tightened corporate control over what farmers, and even home growers, can legally plant. Companies like Monsanto, now owned by Bayer, dominate the seed industry with patented GMO and hybrid seeds. These seeds are often engineered to be sterile or produce unreliable yields in subsequent generations, forcing farmers and growers to buy new seeds every year. While marketed as innovation, this locks consumers into corporate dependency and makes it harder for individuals to establish truly sustainable food systems. Then there's the issue of seed sharing and trading, which is a vital practice for small farmers and preppers alike. Some states, like Minnesota and Pennsylvania, have implemented restrictions under the guise of Seed Act regulations. These laws often require seed-sharing initiatives to adhere to rigorous labeling, testing, and registration requirements, barriers that small-scale growers simply can't afford. Violations can result in hefty fines or even criminal charges. If such laws expand, your backyard garden could one day be seen as a legal liability. And let's not forget potential water use restrictions, zoning ordinances, and the looming possibility of quality standards being applied to private gardens. In California, for instance, water restrictions are increasingly used to target agricultural practices during droughts. It's not a stretch to imagine these policies extending to private growers, especially as climate change narratives intensify. The takeaway? Stockpile heirloom and open-pollinated seeds while you can still buy and share them freely. Heirloom seeds produce reliable, fertile offspring, making them a cornerstone of self-sustaining agriculture. Unlike hybrids, they allow you to save seeds from each harvest for the next planting. Focus on high-yield, nutrient-dense crops like beans, tomatoes, and squash, and don't overlook medicinal herbs like chamomile and echinacea. Also, learn about seed storage. Vacuum sealing and freezing can extend seed viability for decades. Finally, consider joining local seed-saving organizations or co-ops. While they're still legal, these groups offer access to diverse seed varieties that you might not find in commercial markets. But keep your activities discreet. As laws tighten, what you plant today could secure your independence tomorrow, or become a target for regulation. Your right to grow your own food is under threat, so act now while you still can. Now I want to hear from you. Which items do you think might become illegal soon? Drop a comment below. If you found this video helpful, smash that like button. And if you want more no BS info on prepping and survival, subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss any updates. As always, stay safe and stay prepared. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.